Imagine being a German soldier stationed in occupied France in the summer of 1943. You are far from home, exhausted from years of war, watching the tide slowly turn against the Third Reich. Every day brings news of setbacks on the Eastern Front, losses in North Africa, and mounting Allied air raids. Then one morning, you find a small piece of paper on the ground. Perhaps it fell from the sky during last night's bombing raid. Perhaps a French civilian dropped it deliberately near your post. Perhaps it simply appeared, as if by magic, among the debris of war. You pick it up. It is a leaflet, printed in German, with a simple message that makes your blood run cold. Because this leaflet knows your name. It knows your unit. It knows where you served, and it knows a secret you thought was buried forever, a decision you made that could get you executed if the SS ever found out. This is not random propaganda. This is targeted. This is personal, and this is terrifying. What you do not know is that this single leaflet is part of the most sophisticated psychological warfare operation of World War II, an operation that would cause dozens of German officers to betray the Nazi regime, that would feed critical intelligence to the Allies, and that would expose a network of resistance, espionage, and propaganda so intricate that historians are still unraveling it 8 decades later. Welcome to Cipher Tales, where we decode the hidden intersections of World War II propaganda and espionage. Today, we are revealing the extraordinary story of the forgotten leaflets that sparked a Nazi betrayal. The paper trail begins now. Let us decode it. Act 1. The Weapon of Words. Psychological Warfare in World War II. The Evolution of Paper Warfare. Before we can understand how leaflets sparked betrayals, we must understand the role of printed propaganda in World War II. Paper was a weapon as surely as bullets and bombs, and all sides recognized its power. Propaganda leaflets, airdropped over enemy territory or smuggled through resistance networks, served multiple purposes. They aimed to demoralize enemy troops by highlighting losses, hardships, and the futility of continued fighting. They encouraged desertion by offering safe passage and humane treatment to those who surrendered. They spread disinformation to create confusion and mistrust, and they provided hope to occupied populations by promising liberation and encouraging resistance. The scale was massive. During World War II, Allied forces dropped billions of propaganda leaflets over German-occupied Europe, Germany itself, and Axis territories in North Africa and Asia. The British Political Warfare Executive and the American Office of Strategic Services produced these materials in dozens of languages, targeting specific audiences with tailored messages. Early in the war, leaflet campaigns were crude, using broad appeals and obvious propaganda. A typical leaflet might show cartoon images of Hitler as a warmonger, statistics about German losses, or appeals to surrender. German soldiers largely ignored these, dismissing them as transparent enemy propaganda. But as the war progressed, Allied psychological warfare became far more sophisticated. Intelligence services began creating leaflets that appeared authentic, that contained verifiable information soldiers could confirm, and that exploited specific anxieties and divisions within German forces. This evolution transformed leaflets from nuisance to weapon. And nowhere was this transformation more dramatic than in the creation of personalized, targeted leaflets that would ultimately cause German officers to betray their own regime. The organizations behind the paper. Several Allied organizations contributed to leaflet operations, but two were particularly important. The British Political Warfare Executive, established in 1941, coordinated all British propaganda and psychological warfare efforts. Staffed by intelligence officers, journalists, academics, and creative professionals, the PWE produced everything from forged German newspapers to radio broadcasts to the leaflets that are the focus of our story. The American Office of Strategic Services, predecessor to the CIA, established its own morale operations branch in 1943 specifically for psychological warfare. This branch worked closely with the British, sharing intelligence, production facilities, and distribution networks. Both organizations recognized that effective propaganda required accurate intelligence. You cannot demoralize an enemy if you do not understand what demoralizes them. You cannot exploit divisions if you do not know where those divisions exist. And you cannot create personalized leaflets without detailed information about individual targets. This recognition drove a crucial integration. Propaganda operations became intelligence operations. The people creating leaflets were not just writers and artists. They were intelligence analysts who used classified information to craft messages designed to break enemy morale and, in some cases, to turn enemy personnel into Allied assets. The leaflets we are examining today represent the pinnacle of this integration. They were created using intelligence gathered from multiple sources, targeted at specific individuals based on psychological profiles, and distributed through networks that combined aerial drops with espionage tradecraft. The German context: a Reich under strain. To understand why these leaflets proved so effective, we must understand the German military and political situation in 1943 and 1944. By mid-1943, Germany's strategic position had deteriorated significantly. The Wehrmacht had suffered catastrophic losses at Stalingrad. North Africa was lost. The Allies had invaded Sicily and Italy. The Eastern Front consumed men and materiel at unsustainable rates. Allied bombing campaigns devastated German cities and industries. Within the German military and political establishment, cracks appeared. Not everyone remained fanatically loyal to Hitler. Some officers, particularly those from traditional military families, had always viewed the Nazi regime with suspicion. Others, watching Germany slide toward defeat, began questioning whether continued resistance served any purpose beyond prolonging suffering. The German resistance, centered in elements of the Wehrmacht and intelligence services, grew more active. Figures like Admiral Wilhelm Canaris of the Abwehr and officers who would later participate in the July 20, 1944 assassination attempt against Hitler represented a faction that sought to remove the Nazi leadership and negotiate peace. These divisions created opportunities for Allied psychological warfare. If propaganda could identify wavering officers, if it could speak directly to their doubts and fears, if it could offer them alternatives to blind loyalty, perhaps it could turn them from enemies into sources, informants, or even active collaborators. This was the strategic insight behind the personalized leaflet campaign. Exploit the cracks in German unity by targeting individuals at their most vulnerable points.
Act 2. The Intelligence, Knowing the Enemy. Sources of information. Creating personalized leaflets required extraordinarily detailed intelligence about individual German officers. Where did this information come from? First, prisoners of war. Allied interrogators questioned captured German soldiers extensively, gathering not just military intelligence, but personal information about officers, unit dynamics, political opinions, and morale issues. A captured sergeant might reveal that his commanding officer had expressed doubts about the war, or that a particular colonel had family in a bombed German city and blamed Nazi leadership for the destruction. Second, signals intelligence. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked German military codes, allowing the Allies to read Wehrmacht communications. These intercepts provided detailed information about troop movements, command assignments, supply problems, and internal disputes. Sometimes officers mentioned personal matters in communications they believed were secure, inadvertently providing psychological profile information. Third, resistance networks. French, Belgian, Dutch, and other resistance groups in occupied territories gathered intelligence on German forces stationed in their countries. They observed which officers were harsh occupiers and which were more lenient, who frequented brothels, who drank excessively, who treated locals with unexpected kindness. This behavioral intelligence helped psychological warfare specialists understand individual personalities and vulnerabilities. Fourth, defectors and turned agents. German soldiers who deserted or intelligence officers who secretly worked for the Allies provided insider perspectives on Wehrmacht culture, command relationships, and individual officers' reputations and weaknesses. Fifth, open-source intelligence. German newspapers, military publications, and official announcements provided information about promotions, awards, transfers, and casualties. Cross-referencing this public information with classified intelligence created detailed profiles. Sixth, and most remarkably, previous leaflet responses. When earlier propaganda campaigns prompted responses, whether soldiers surrendering with leaflets in their pockets or letters sent to Allied authorities from German personnel seeking contact, intelligence analysts studied these responses to understand what messaging worked and why. All this information flowed to analysts in London and later in liberated territories where it was compiled into target dossiers. These dossiers contained everything known about specific German officers, their service records, family situation, political background, personality traits, relationships with fellow officers, and any indicators of wavering loyalty or moral conflict. The profiles. Understanding vulnerability. Psychological warfare specialists developed profiles of German officers most likely to be receptive to targeted propaganda. These profiles identified several vulnerability categories. The disillusioned idealist. Officers who had joined the military before the Nazi rise to power, who maintained traditional military values and who became increasingly disturbed by Nazi atrocities and strategic incompetence. These officers might be reached with appeals to honor, duty to Germany beyond the regime, and the moral necessity of ending a war that was destroying their nation. The pragmatic survivor. Officers who recognized Germany was losing and wanted to position themselves favorably for the post-war period. These officers might respond to messages about the futility of continued resistance, the benefits of cooperating with the Allies, and the risks of being associated with Nazi war crimes as defeat approached. The family man. Officers with wives and children in German cities being devastated by Allied bombing. These officers might be vulnerable to messages emphasizing that prolonging the war only increased suffering for German civilians, and that cooperating with the Allies could potentially protect their families. The compromised officer. Personnel who had committed actions that violated military regulations or Nazi ideology, such as showing mercy to prisoners, engaging in black market activities, or expressing political doubts. These officers could be targeted with messages suggesting the SS or Gestapo knew their secrets, creating fear that cooperation with the Allies offered the only escape from Nazi punishment. The ambitious opportunist. Officers frustrated by the Nazi promotion system who might be receptive to offers of post-war positions in a new German government if they provided intelligence or assistance to the Allies. These profiles were not mutually exclusive. A single officer might fit multiple categories, and the most effective leaflets often appealed to several vulnerabilities simultaneously. Creating the dossiers. Intelligence analysts created detailed dossiers on hundreds of German officers identified as potential targets. A typical dossier might contain personal information, full name, rank, age, birthplace, family status, home address in Germany, service record, military career history, unit served with, combat experience, awards and decorations, disciplinary actions. Current assignment, present location, command responsibilities, unit designation. Psychological profile, personality assessment based on observed behavior, statements made to fellow officers or prisoners, and behavioral patterns. Vulnerabilities, specific factors that might make the officer receptive to Allied approaches, such as family in bombed cities, pre-Nazi military service, connections to resistance figures, or evidence of moral conflict about Nazi policies. Known secrets, compromising information that could be used as leverage, such as black market involvement, relationships with local civilians in occupied territories, or instances of showing unexpected mercy or leniency. Recommended approach, specific messaging strategies tailored to the individual's profile and vulnerabilities. These dossiers were classified top secret and stored in secure facilities. Only personnel directly involved in psychological warfare operations had access. The information was too sensitive and valuable to risk compromise. With these dossiers in hand, the specialists could begin creating the personalized leaflets that would target specific German officers with devastating precision. Act 3. The creation. Crafting the perfect psychological weapon. The design philosophy. Creating effective personalized leaflets required balancing multiple objectives. The leaflets had to be personal enough to convince the target they were specifically created for him, but subtle enough that if found by others, they would not obviously compromise him. They had to contain accurate information to establish credibility, but not so much detail that they revealed Allied intelligence capabilities. They had to offer clear inducements or threats, but frame them in ways that appealed to the target's specific psychological profile. The designers were not just propagandists, they were psychological warfare specialists who understood manipulation, persuasion, and human vulnerability. Many had backgrounds in advertising, journalism, or clinical psychology. They approached each leaflet as a custom-designed psychological operation targeting a single individual.
The structure of personalized leaflets. While each leaflet was unique, most followed a similar structure designed to maximize psychological impact. The hook. The opening had to grab attention immediately and establish that this was not random propaganda. Often, this involved using the target's name, rank, and unit designation right at the beginning. For example, Oberst Friedrich Schmidt, commanding officer of the 116th Panzer Division, this message is for you. This immediate personalization created shock and fear. How did the Allies know his exact identity and position? What else did they know? The demonstration of knowledge. The next section proved the leaflet was genuinely targeted by revealing specific information about the officer that he believed was private or secret. This might include details about his service record that were not publicly known, information about his family, or references to specific incidents or decisions he had made. For example, we know that on March 3rd, you countermanded orders from Berlin to execute captured partisans. We know that your wife Anna and daughters Eva and Greta evacuated from Hamburg after the July bombing raids. We know that you confided to Oberst Müller that you believe this war is lost. Each piece of information was carefully selected to be accurate, specific, and impossible for the target to dismiss as lucky guesses or general propaganda. The cumulative effect was to create a sense that the Allies possessed comprehensive intelligence about him personally. The message. After establishing credibility through demonstrated knowledge, the leaflet delivered its core message. This varied depending on the operation's objective and the target's profile. Some leaflets encouraged cooperation. You are an honorable officer serving a dishonorable regime. You know Germany cannot win. Continued resistance only brings more death and destruction. You have the power to save lives by providing information that will shorten this war. Contact us through the channels we will describe. Others created fear of Nazi discovery. The SS is investigating your decision to release those prisoners. Your colleagues have already been questioned. They know about your doubts regarding party doctrine. Your current position offers no protection. Only by reaching out to us can you secure safety for yourself and your family. Still others appealed to pragmatism. When Germany surrenders, those who cooperated with the Allies will be remembered favorably. Those who fought to the bitter end will face justice for prolonging suffering. Your choice now determines your future after the war ends. The call to action. The leaflet concluded with specific instructions for how the officer could make contact. This might include surrender procedures with safe passage guarantees, dead drop locations where messages could be left, radio frequencies monitored for coded communications, or even the arrangement of signals. These were specific actions that would indicate a willingness to cooperate. The authentication. Finally, many leaflets included elements that authenticated them as genuine Allied intelligence rather than Gestapo traps designed to identify disloyal officers. This might involve referencing information only the Allies could know, such as intelligence derived from decoded communications, or even including code phrases that resistance networks had previously shared with German personnel who had shown sympathy. Production and distribution. Once designed, the leaflets were produced with careful attention to operational security. Printing occurred at secure facilities with runs typically limited to a few hundred copies of each personalized leaflet, sometimes just dozens or even single copies. Distribution was the most challenging aspect. Unlike mass-produced propaganda leaflets that could be dropped by the millions from aircraft, personalized leaflets had to reach their specific targets without being detected. Several methods were employed. Targeted airdrops. Intelligence determined where specific German units were stationed. Aircraft would drop small batches of personalized leaflets over those precise locations, timed for when the target officer might find them. Sometimes regular propaganda leaflets were mixed with personalized ones to create cover. Resistance insertion. French, Belgian, or other resistance fighters would place leaflets where specific German officers would find them, perhaps near their billets, command posts, or locations they frequented. This required precise intelligence about the officer's movements and routines. Direct delivery through turned agents. In some cases, German soldiers or officers who had already been turned by Allied intelligence would deliver leaflets directly to their targets, sometimes with additional verbal encouragement. Postal infiltration. A few leaflets were sent through compromised postal channels in occupied territories, disguised as routine correspondence that would reach the officer. The distribution method was carefully chosen based on operational security considerations, the target's location and circumstances, and the available intelligence about German counterintelligence activities in that area. The first campaign, testing the concept. The first systematic use of personalized leaflets occurred in mid-1943, targeting approximately 40 German officers in France identified through intelligence analysis as potentially receptive to Allied approaches. The operation was experimental. No one knew if personalized leaflets would work better than traditional mass propaganda.
The planning was meticulous, with each target carefully selected and each leaflet precisely crafted based on extensive intelligence. The leaflets were distributed over a 3-month period between June and August 1943. Then Allied intelligence waited to see what would happen. The results exceeded expectations.
Act 4. The Betrayal. How leaflets turned enemies into allies. The first responses. Within weeks of the first personalized leaflets being distributed, Allied intelligence began receiving responses. These came through various channels: officers presenting themselves to resistance networks, coded radio messages from German positions, and in one dramatic case, an officer who arranged his unit's surrender during a tactical engagement specifically to make contact with Allied intelligence. The initial responses revealed that the leaflets had achieved their primary psychological effect. They had terrified their targets. Officers who received them realized the Allies possessed detailed intelligence about them personally. Many assumed their communications were compromised, their movements were monitored, and their secrets were known. This fear, paradoxically, made cooperation seem like the safest option. If the Allies knew everything already, there was no point in continued resistance. If the SS was going to discover their disloyalty anyway, better to work with the Allies who offered protection than wait for Gestapo arrest. Case study: the colonel who changed sides. One of the most significant early successes involved a German colonel. We will call him Colonel Werner, commanding an infantry regiment in northern France. Werner's fit the profile of a disillusioned idealist. He had joined the Wehrmacht before the Nazi rise to power, came from an old military family, and had expressed private doubts about Nazi leadership to fellow officers. Allied intelligence compiled a comprehensive dossier on Werner based on intercepted communications, prisoner interrogations that mentioned him, and resistance observations of his unit's behavior in occupied territory. The dossier noted that Werner had prevented his troops from conducting reprisal executions against French civilians, had clashed with SS officers over treatment of prisoners, and had a wife and children in Stuttgart, which had been heavily bombed. A personalized leaflet was crafted specifically for Werner. It opened with his full name, rank, and unit. It referenced his efforts to prevent civilian executions, suggesting the Allies appreciated his honor even as he served in dishonorable cause. It mentioned his family in Stuttgart and expressed sympathy for their suffering under Allied bombing, subtly suggesting that cooperating with the Allies could potentially protect them. It concluded with an offer: provide intelligence about German defensive positions and troop strengths, and be guaranteed safe passage to Allied lines when the invasion came. The leaflet was delivered through a French resistance member who operated a café frequented by German officers. She simply left it folded on a table where Werner typically sat. Werner found it 3 days later. According to his post-war debriefing, his first reaction was panic. How did the Allies know so much about him? Were they monitoring all his communications? Had someone in his unit betrayed him? Was this a Gestapo trap to test his loyalty? For 2 weeks, Werner did nothing, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Then a second leaflet appeared, this time slipped under his quarters door. This one was shorter but more pointed. Colonel Werner, time is running short. The invasion is coming. Those who help us will be protected. Those who resist will be remembered as war criminals. Choose wisely. This leaflet referenced the upcoming Allied invasion of France, which Werner knew was inevitable, even if he did not know when or where. It also invoked the fear of post-war retribution, a concern weighing on many German officers as the tide turned against Germany. Werner made his decision. Using a prearranged signal mentioned in the leaflet, he indicated to a French civilian known to work with the resistance that he wished to make contact. Within a week, he had provided detailed intelligence about German defensive positions along the Normandy coast, information that would prove valuable when D-Day arrived months later. Werner's cooperation was kept completely secret.
He remained in command of his regiment, appearing to be a loyal German officer while secretly feeding intelligence to the Allies through dead drops and coded messages. This arrangement continued until Allied forces liberated his sector, at which point he surrendered his unit without resistance and was taken into protective custody. Post-war, Werner was never prosecuted for war crimes. His cooperation with the Allies, combined with his documented efforts to limit atrocities during the occupation, protected him. He eventually returned to civilian life in West Germany. The network effect. One betrayal leads to many. Werner's case illustrates a crucial dynamic. Personalized leaflet operations did not just turn individual officers, they created cascading effects. Once Werner began cooperating, he provided intelligence not just about military matters, but about other German officers in his sector. He identified which commanders might be receptive to Allied approaches, who was fanatically loyal, and who was privately expressing doubts. This intelligence allowed psychological warfare specialists to create additional targeted leaflets for other officers, expanding the network of cooperation. Furthermore, as more officers returned, the Allies gained better intelligence for crafting even more effective leaflets. Each successful operation provided insights into what messaging worked, what fears were most potent, and what inducements were most appealing. By early 1944, dozens of German officers across occupied France, Belgium, and the Netherlands were providing intelligence to the Allies, many of them initially recruited through personalized leaflet campaigns. Some provided military intelligence, others sabotaged their own operations, deliberately bungling missions or delaying responses to Allied actions. A few actively assisted resistance movements or arranged for supplies and weapons to fall into partisan hands. This network of compromised German officers gave the Allies significant operational advantages. They had advance warning of German counterintelligence operations, detailed knowledge of defensive preparations, and ability to influence German decision-making through the officers they controlled.
The risks and failures. Not every personalized leaflet operation succeeded. Some targeted officers ignored the leaflets entirely, whether from genuine loyalty to the Nazi regime, fear that cooperation was too risky, or suspicion that the leaflets were Gestapo tests. A few operations ended catastrophically. In at least 2 documented cases, officers who received leaflets reported them to their superiors, triggering investigations that compromised resistance networks and led to arrests. In one tragic incident, a resistance member delivering a personalized leaflet was caught by German security forces, tortured, and forced to reveal details about Allied intelligence operations in her region. There was also the constant risk that German counterintelligence would discover the leaflet campaigns and develop countermeasures. If the Gestapo realized that personalized leaflets were successfully turning German officers, they might flood the same channels with fake leaflets designed to identify disloyal personnel, or use the technique themselves to sow confusion and mistrust. Allied psychological warfare specialists had to constantly balance aggression with caution, weighing the potential intelligence gains from successful operations against the risk of compromising methods and sources. The measurement of success. How effective were personalized leaflet campaigns? Precise metrics are difficult to establish because much of the relevant intelligence remains classified even today. However, declassified post-war assessments provide some indicators. One British intelligence report from 1945 estimated that personalized leaflet operations contributed to the recruitment of approximately 60 to 70 German officers who provided varying levels of cooperation to the Allies between 1943 and 1945. Some were full double agents, actively working for Allied intelligence. Others provided specific pieces of information on opportunistic bases. Still others simply failed to execute their duties with full commitment, a form of passive resistance that still benefited the Allies. The intelligence gained through these compromised officers contributed to multiple Allied successes. Information about German defensive positions aided D-Day planning, Early warning about German counteroffensives provided tactical advantages. Details about Wehrmacht internal divisions and morale problems informed strategic assessments. Perhaps most importantly, the personalized leaflet campaigns sowed paranoia within German forces. Officers knew that Allied intelligence possessed detailed information about individuals, and that propaganda specifically targeted personnel identified as vulnerable. This knowledge created an atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust, as officers wondered which of their colleagues might have been turned and whether their own communications were being monitored. This psychological impact, the corrosive effect on German military cohesion and morale, may have been the leaflet campaign's greatest achievement. Act 5. The Mechanics: How Propaganda and Espionage Merged. The operational integration. The personalized leaflet campaigns represent perhaps the most complete integration of propaganda and espionage operations during World War II. They were simultaneously psychological warfare, designed to demoralize and manipulate enemy personnel, and intelligence operations, designed to recruit sources and gather information. This integration required unprecedented cooperation between different organizations and specialties. Intelligence analysts provided the target selection and personal information. Psychological warfare specialists crafted the messages and designed the leaflets. Artists and printers produced the physical materials. Resistance networks and special operations units handled distribution. Case officers managed the officers who responded, turning propaganda targets into intelligence assets. The entire process, from initial intelligence gathering through target selection, leaflet creation, distribution, and follow-up with responsive officers, could take months and involve dozens of people across multiple organizations and countries. This complexity created challenges. Operational security was paramount, as any leak could compromise not just individual operations, but the entire program. Coordination between British and American organizations required careful management. The need to protect intelligence sources sometimes conflicted with the desire to include the most compelling information in leaflets. Yet the system worked, producing one of World War II's most innovative intelligence programs. The feedback loop. One remarkable aspect of personalized leaflet operations was the feedback loop they created between propaganda and espionage. Traditional propaganda was one-way communication. Leaflets were created and distributed, with little direct feedback about their effectiveness. Psychological warfare specialists could make assumptions about impact based on prisoner interrogations or captured documents, but they rarely knew if specific messages worked. Personalized leaflets changed this. When targeted officers responded, they provided direct feedback about what messaging had convinced them. Intelligence officers debriefing these turned agents could ask, "What in the leaflet persuaded you? What made you believe it was authentic? What fears did it trigger? What inducements were most appealing?" This feedback informed the next generation of leaflets, creating a continuous improvement process. Messaging that proved effective was replicated in operations targeting similar profiles. Approaches that failed were modified or abandoned. The feedback loop also worked in reverse. As turned German officers provided more intelligence about Wehrmacht culture, command relationships, and morale issues, psychological warfare specialists gained better understanding of how to craft effective messages. The intelligence gathered through espionage operations improved the propaganda, which in turn enabled more successful espionage operations.
The legacy for intelligence tradecraft. The personalized leaflet campaigns pioneered techniques that became standard in post-war intelligence work. Psychological profiling. The detailed dossiers created on German officers represented early systematic use of psychological profiling for intelligence purposes. This approach, identifying targets based on vulnerability profiles and crafting individualized recruitment pitches, became foundational to Cold War and modern intelligence recruitment methods.
Integrated operations. The seamless blending of propaganda and espionage in a single operation influenced how intelligence services structured their organizations and planned their activities. Today's intelligence agencies routinely integrate information operations with human intelligence collection, cyber operations with psychological warfare. Precision targeting. The concept of using intelligence to target specific individuals with tailored messaging rather than broadcasting generic appeals transformed psychological warfare. Modern influence operations, whether conducted by intelligence services or digital marketers, employ similar precision targeting enabled by data collection and analysis. Feedback-driven iteration. The continuous improvement process, using operational results to refine methods and messaging, became standard practice for intelligence programs. The ethical questions. The personalized leaflet campaigns also raise ethical questions that remain relevant today. Was it justified to exploit individual vulnerabilities, family situations, and personal fears to turn enemy officers? From a military perspective, these operations saved Allied lives by providing intelligence and encouraging surrender rather than continued resistance. But they also involved manipulation and psychological coercion of individuals who, in many cases, were trying to serve their country honorably despite serving a criminal regime. What about the promises made in the leaflets? Were officers who cooperated based on assurances of safety and post-war protection truly protected? Most were based on available evidence, but not all. Some turned officers were later prosecuted for war crimes unrelated to their cooperation. Others found that Allied protection was limited once the war ended and priorities shifted. There is also the question of unintended consequences. Did the paranoia created by these operations harm German officers who never received leaflets and remained loyal? Were innocent people caught up in Gestapo investigations triggered by the campaigns? These questions do not have simple answers. The personalized leaflet operations occurred in the context of total war against a genocidal regime, which provides moral justification for aggressive intelligence methods. Yet the techniques employed were manipulative and sometimes cruel, raising questions about means and ends that extend beyond the specific historical context. Conclusion: the paper trail decoded. The full picture revealed. So we return to our opening scene, a German officer finding a leaflet that knows his name, his secrets, his fears. Now we understand the full story behind that moment. That leaflet was not random propaganda. It was the culmination of extensive intelligence gathering, psychological analysis, careful crafting, and risky distribution. It represented the Allied intelligence services' most sophisticated attempt to turn the enemy's own personnel against the Nazi regime by exploiting the cracks in German military cohesion. The leaflet campaigns worked because they combined accurate intelligence with psychological insight. They identified officers at moments of maximum vulnerability and offered them what they most wanted: safety, protection for families, escape from moral complicity in Nazi crimes, or simply hope that cooperation would lead to better post-war outcomes. The betrayals these leaflets sparked were not betrayals of Germany, but of the Nazi regime. Many officers who cooperated genuinely believed they were acting honorably by helping end a war that was destroying their nation. Others were motivated by fear or self-interest, but collectively, they provided intelligence that saved Allied lives and hastened Nazi Germany's defeat. At Cipher Tales, we decode these forgotten intersections where propaganda and espionage merged into operations that changed history. The personalized leaflet campaigns represent a perfect example. Public materials carrying secret purposes, words on paper wielding power beyond their weight, psychological warfare becoming intelligence collection. These leaflets have been largely forgotten. Most were destroyed during or after the war. The operations remained classified for decades. The officers who responded were often reluctant to discuss their actions, whether from shame, fear, or simply desire to leave the past behind. But the techniques pioneered in these campaigns echo through modern intelligence work.
Every time an intelligence service creates a tailored recruitment pitch based on detailed profiling, every time psychological warfare specialists craft messages designed to exploit specific vulnerabilities, every time propaganda and espionage merge in integrated operations, the legacy of World War II's personalized leaflet campaigns lives on.
The story of these leaflets reminds us that warfare is not just physical, but psychological. Battles are fought in minds as well as on battlefields, and sometimes the most effective weapons are not the most obvious. In our next upload on Cipher Tales, we are decoding the radio broadcast that hid a resistance network. You will discover how Allied intelligence used enemy airwaves to communicate with occupied populations, while the Nazis listened without understanding. If this deep dive into the forgotten leaflets that sparked Nazi betrayals fascinated you, please subscribe to Cipher Tales for more decoded mysteries from the hidden history of World War II. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. Like this video if you found it revealing and thought-provoking. Every like helps us reach more people who appreciate the complex, hidden dimensions of history. Comment below and tell us, were you surprised by how personalized and targeted World War II propaganda could be? Do you think the manipulation techniques used were justified given the context? What other World War II propaganda and espionage intersections should we decode next? Share this video with anyone fascinated by espionage history, psychological warfare, or the subtle ways intelligence services influence human behavior. Until then, remember, the most powerful messages are often the most personal, targeting not armies, but individual hearts and minds. This has been Cipher Tales. Keep questioning, keep decoding, keep discovering the secrets that changed history.